What's up, everybody? Citizen JV, and today we're going to be talking about Resident Evil 2 Remake. Yes, I've been really trying to make a video on this for quite some time. I finally got it finished earlier today, and we are now putting my commentary as I speak. So, here we go. I think what makes Resident Evil 2 Remake very interesting, and the way how it plays, is what I was expecting with this game. And not only that, I totally remember playing this game back on the original PlayStation days, and it was still scary overall, because it's an older school game, right? But I knew that there was going to be a remake on the rebound, or in the not too distant future, is where we are now. And so I think what makes Resident Evil 2 Remake very cool as well is that I'm really glad that they finally did this remake. I'm really glad that it has a little bit of some Resident Evil 7 vibes in a way, but it's not first person, but it's third person. But it does have that a little bit of that inventory management system. However, I think what Resident Evil 2 Remake does astonishingly well is the graphic design and the overhaul mechanics of the game itself from that of the original back on PlayStation 1 days. And I think it does it perfectly or flawlessly. But overall, as I previously mentioned in other videos that I have made in the past few weeks, no game is never flawless. Really. I really thoroughly believe that. But however, I will say I think Resident Evil 2 Remake just does something very interesting in how it differentiates from other old school games. Because when it came to the older Resident Evil games back on the PS1 or even on the Sega Dreamcast, they didn't have over-the-shoulder camera systems, much like what we have now when it comes to Resident Evil 5 or Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 6, which wasn't a bad game. I liked it to a certain degree, but overall, I'm just veering a little bit off topic here. Resident Evil 2 Remake, I think, just does something. It's a little difficult for me to say. But however, I do think that Resident Evil 2 Remake just does something that makes it very cool at the same time, is the fact I love the story. The story, for what I understand, still retains from its original storytelling from the original back on PlayStation 1, which is good. I really do believe that they did a good job with that because, as far as I know, is that, we recently got the Dead Space remake, and they did some very different, unique differences from that of the original back in the day of 2008 when the game first initially released. However, in Resident Evil 2 Remake, they didn't really have any. Well, the only thing that's new about it is that it's over the shoulder. It's not like from its original camera design from that of the original PS1. But all they did with the remake is that they revamped the graphics, they upped the pixelization, they enhanced everything from what the original first one did. And I think that they did a really good job with that. I think that's another thing that why I love Resident Evil 2 as a whole. I am a huge Resident Evil fan, always have been and always will be. Now, what I will say is that I'm not sure if I want to make a video on Resident Evil 3. I did thoroughly enjoy Resident Evil 3, but if I have to admit something here right now, is that I enjoyed Resident Evil 2 Remake more than I did with Resident Evil 3 Remake. I'm not saying that Resident Evil 3 Remake didn't really do a good job. I did like it. I did like the story, but it felt to me that there was just something about it that I didn't really quietly enjoy, and I really can't describe what made me feel this way, or still do. It's just very hard to understand or hard to describe it, so my bad on that. However, I think when it comes to the Resident Evil 2 Remake, I think this game, man, it just brings back the nostalgia again. It really does. And it did the same exact thing for me for the Dead Space remake. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to remakes, remakes are not always going to be the best thing when it comes to any type of media. Whether if it's movies, video games, or anything. And so to me personally, I really think that the Dead Space remake and Resident Evil 2 remake really did something that a lot of people or fans weren't really quite expecting, really. A lot of people were excited. Of course, we have every reason to be. But however, I really do believe that when it comes to remakes in general, I think that there's always going to be a general consensus of knowing that, like I said, remakes are not always the best. They really aren't, because sometimes they can be not as good, even though it has some updated graphics and visuals and some gameplay overhaul and vice versa. But however, it's just not going to be, sometimes they're not always going to feel the same. But however, like I said before, Resident Evil 2 and the Dead Space remake, I would say I think those are the best 2 remakes I have ever played. I didn't play much of Resident Evil 3 back in the day, back on the original PlayStation. And I think that's another reason why I liked Resident Evil 3 remake, because like I said, I didn't play it on the regular PlayStation 1. And so that's one thing I do really have to give that game, is that it was good. But like I said, however, Resident Evil 2 remake just, I don't know. I like its story, and I do like the fact that they still had that implementation of, switching between Leon and, I forgot what her name was, Claire Redfield. And so that's one thing I really enjoyed about Resident Evil 2, is because, their stories align, especially when they finally start meeting up with each other, and trying to find a way out of Raccoon City. And that's another thing, though, too. What I love about the Resident Evil 2 remake is that it's the zombies. I think the zombies in this game is one of the best I've seen, other than from, like Dying Light or Dying Light 2, for that matter. But that's what makes Resident Evil 2 remake so different from that of the Dying Light series as well, because yes, the zombies look more realistic in the Dying Light games, because they were actually a little bit more higher quality when it came to the graphic and visual fidelity of those games. But however, I think Resident Evil 2, it just does it better, because it knows what it's doing. It knows what it uses, like, I forgot what kind of engine that they use, but they call it the Resident Evil engine, as far as I know. And so now, I want to put something out there here real quick. I recently played a little bit of that Resident Evil 4 demo, which was the chainsaw demo, as of last night, actually. I played it for about, maybe I would say, I think it was no less than 10 minutes. And there is one thing I will definitely give that demo some credit, is I love the visual fidelity on it. I think it's one of the best I've seen, other than from Village or Resident Evil 2 remake or Resident Evil 3 remake, or even Dead Space 3 remake. Dead Space 3, listen to me. But however, there was something about the Resident Evil 4 demo remake, is that I did not like the gunplay in it for some reason. I don't know what it was. I really couldn't figure it out. And then when I finally realized that it's not the same as the original, and it's the same thing what I previously mentioned about, like the remakes in general. I'm going back to that just for a brief moment here, because like I said, it just didn't feel the same. The only thing that's different about it, it's his upscale graphics and what they did and what they had to achieve in order to make the game a lot more scarier, a lot more environmental ways. And that's the only thing that game has. And I think that's another thing that's what remakes also have as well. It's always going to feel different from that of the original. But overall, you're still getting that nostalgia feeling to it. And I get that. But however, like I said, I really don't know how to describe as to why I didn't like the demo of the Resident Evil 4 remake. There was just something about it that kind of just irked me the wrong way. But however, I think Resident Evil 2, other than what I just recently mentioned, is I love Raccoon City in 2. I think it's one of the best settings in a video game series. You know, of course, Raccoon City is basically the hub, the whole entire story arc, or its whole entire dilemma based around this Resident Evil games. And I think that's what makes these games so important, because it's always going to have that story arc. It's always going to be that zombie-infected virus or whatnot. And I think that's another reason why the Resident Evil games are so well beloved and so well received from so many fans out there, including me. Now, I think Resident Evil 2... I'm trying to find something here to say. I love its gunplay. I think it's one of the best I've seen, even though that this game is a little bit older now. But what I can say is that when it comes to remakes like this one specifically, I think that obviously the game's going to be a lot better now, as it usually was or have been on the PlayStation 1 era, obviously. Because, you know, like I mentioned, you know, with the Resident Evil 2 back on PS1, obviously the games are going to be outdated. The graphics are going to be outdated. There's no over-the-shoulder camera system like the newer ones that we have now today. And, you know, but that's where the nostalgia factor comes in. And I get that. And I think that's what's awesome about when it comes to old school games in general. And so it's the same thing as with Dead Space, you know, with the remake, like I previously mentioned, that it just came out about a month or two ago. And that nostalgia factor came reeling through me again. And I loved it. It was amazing. And so what I'm saying is that I think Resident Evil 2 just did what the Dead Space remake did. You know, it felt nostalgic, even though it's the same exact game, but with just updated visuals and graphics and a visual overhaul, you know, all those necessities that they did with what they do with remakes. And I think that's the most very interesting way of putting it, if that makes sense. And so I think Resident Evil 2, comparing it to the Dead Space remake, or comparing it to Resident Evil 3 remake, yeah, man, I don't know. I just think Resident Evil 2, you know, you're inside a police station, for crying out loud. And that's another thing I think what Resident Evil 2 remake did very well as well. You know, you're playing through a Raccoon City Police Department building, and you're going up some zombies, you know, you're going through certain types of areas that are lockable, but and you can't get through them just yet because you have to do certain types of puzzles and vice versa. And that's one thing I will discuss about Resident Evil 2 as well, is that I love the puzzle system in Resident Evil 2. I don't think it's one of the best I've seen, but it's very intricate, and it's very interesting of how they did it. Obviously, you know, they had the same exact type of puzzle system from the original, and I think that's another thing that they did really well, you know, like bringing some of that nostalgia factor or feeling to it into the remake, and I think it just does it good. It really does it justice, and I like that. It's remarkable. So, another thing I will put in here is that I really enjoyed the gameplay. I think the gameplay in Resident Evil 2 Remake, other than having the over-the-shoulder camera system, you know, like we've had in Resident Evil 6, 5, and 4, obviously. And so I would really like to see games like this going forward as far as the Resident Evil game series is concerned, or any other games for that matter in this type of genre. And so I just think that it's important to know, or it's important to say, or as it goes without saying, I want to see another Resident Evil game in this type of aspect. I really do, because I think that they should do that going forward. Now, what I will say is that they did a really good job with Resident Evil 8 Village. I love the first-person mode in that game. They did, however, have a patch or update not too long ago. I think it was about a month or two ago. You can now play it in third person. But Resident Evil 7 only has first-person mode. They didn't have any update to provide you go into third person in that game. So, but either or, I think those games are still fantastic. They were so much fun. I loved Resident Evil 7. But if you want to watch videos or watch my video on Resident Evil 7, just go ahead and find it and you'll be able and tell me what you think. So that'd be much greatly appreciated. Now, in closing, I would say I think Resident Evil 2 is definitely a remake worth picking up or worth playing because, like I said, it's highly recommended. You will have lots of fun with this game, and I do believe that Resident Evil 2 Remake has a higher does have a high replayability rate. It really does, and so I would say I think Resident Evil 3 probably has a good replayability rate as well. But probably I would say Resident Evil 2 just has a higher replayable rate than Resident Evil 3. But however, anyways, this is Citizen JV. Thank you for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. But if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to reply back if and whenever possible. You guys have a great rest of your weekend. Peace.